Welcome everyone to season 3 of National Park Service Presents. This is a pretty special one because it is our final one of the season. It is a mixture of excitement, but a little bit of bittersweet. But tonight is going to be a really good one. I know you're probably a little sad that this is our final one, but honestly, the sun is out and most of you will go outside as well. Don't have to be too sad because we are coming back for season 4. All right, so look out for us again in January 2024. And I know you're like, 2024, Karen, that is so far. Time moves quickly. But also we are looking into the National Parks programs calendar and even the Boston Public Library programs calendar, because we are doing programs throughout the summer. Nice displays and possibly even in-person programs at the branches in the fall. But don't you worry, we will be coming back for these online presentations in January. Okay.
Oh no, I think Karen got frozen. I believe what she was going to say though is that we're going to have about a 40-minute program.
That are appearing
Questions go in the chat. Oh, are you back now? I just got to the questions in the chat, but you can take it back, Karen.
Oh no, am I freezing? If I am
You're back
freezing,
now.
I apologize. I was doing so well, guys.
Yeah,
It
was holding strong.
I'll do it real quick. Throw your questions in the chat in the navigation bar. There's a little chat button. Send it to everyone or to host in panels. It depends on who you want to talk to. Ranger Sean is going through all the questions and he's going to speak them, ask them. That's the word. He's going to ask Ranger Eric and Ranger Ainsley towards the end. So don't worry if you don't see your question immediately answered. He will pop in at the end. I apologize. My freezing made me a little flustered. YouTube questions, captions. Let's take me off the screen without further babbling from me. Let's welcome the most amazing Rangers that are here and flexible for all of my antics. Ranger Ainsley and Ranger Eric as they present Bunker Hill, Monument and Memory.
Thanks, Karen. So I'm going to kick things off with an introduction. My name's Eric. I'm a visual information specialist with the National Park Service, the National Parks of Boston. I lead a team that we call the Digital Humanities and Innovation Team. And we work on digital humanities projects, different kinds of web content. And we also, we're public historians. And we have this fantastic program where we bring on an intern. We call it our digital public history internship. And every year we pick a project that the intern is going to focus on to build out and present on. And we decided this year to go with memory around Bunker Hill because the 250th is heading up, it's coming upon us very, very quickly. And one of the things we realized is when you think about it, the Battle of Bunker Hill, the event itself only took a few hours in a day in June of 1775. Immediately after, memories of the battle, both from the combatants that survived, the thousands of people that witnessed it, heard it, within that very moment of it ending, you have memories being formed, stories being told. And for the next 248 years, people have told, retold, and remade stories, myths, and meanings about what the battle was. And the most obvious manifestation of some of that memory making is the monument that is proposed. They lay the cornerstone on the 50th anniversary. It takes about 18 years to actually finish. And now you have this massive granite edifice as a memorial to this battle. But this is just one vision from those who built it. People make, remake, retell, find different meanings about the battle, the monument. What does it stand for? The memory in the memory of the battle and the monument, it in fact informs how we understand this monument in this very moment. The meanings that you make of it, the ideas that it evokes, it's all a product of all that memory, all that storytelling from generations from 1775 to this moment. And that will also shape what we see, what we think, what we tell. It's going to shape the future generations. So when we designed this year's digital public history internship, we wanted to look deeper in this at the different ways that people have understood the memory surrounding Bunker Hill throughout the past 250 years. We want to better prepare ourselves and our visitors for America's 250th to find a meaning and make meanings by knowing what people have said, what people have argued, what people wrote, spoke, portrayed, depicted over these past 250 years to try to make sense, to make meaning, to tell a story about this battle and the monument. And it's a good thing we got a really awesome person to fill this internship, Ainsley. She dove in, and I mean, we talk about research, newspapers, pamphlets, speeches, letters, diaries, ephemera, anything and everything. She looked for mentions of the battle, mentions of the monument, mentions of its significance. What was that significance? What were the arguments that someone was trying to make in that time for what audience? And what we want to do is come up with a product, both a digital product and an exhibit at our museum at the Bunker Hill Monument grounds, that will open up and unpack and enable visitors to literally build their own monument based off the different memories and meanings people have made over the past 250 years, and then add their own. And that's one of the products that we're going to roll out as part of this 250th and as part of Ainsley's phenomenal research and work. So on that note, without further ado, I'm going to hand things off to Ainsley.
Awesome. So as Eric mentioned, this project really started with an investigation into the memory of Bunker Hill Monument. So I wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit more about what that means exactly, what historical memory is. And I think that this quote, oh my goodness, this worked earlier.
Right here.
Yeah. I'll just read it. Historical memories are built on specific interpretations of the past, either created or adopted, primarily for the purpose of forging group identities. A shared past, embedded with their ideals, principles, and sense of unity, allows a group to reproduce its identity. There it is. So historical memory is really a collective creation. It's a narrative that a group of people tells about themselves and their shared past. And these memories are ever evolving, depending on a group's needs. And these memories are all vying for a position within our collective understanding of the past. But notably, historical memories are not fact, they're interpretations. And yet historical memories become the stories that the general population believes are true, regardless of whether they're accurate. And one of the tools that is used to shape historical memories are monuments. And again, I have a quote here that I think summarizes those ideas. Far from only being cold piles of stones, monuments have the potential to teach us how the process of commemoration has created a history of its own. Even if the pile of stones remains over the years, aspects of its meaning are constantly being renegotiated by those who observe and use it. So monuments are both a tool that are used to shape historical memory as a place of memory where people gather and commemorate, but they are also a tool to look at the past and see what different people have thought about history over time. But monuments don't derive their authority from the people that have created them. And just because a monument exists doesn't mean that the original intentions are the only meanings of that space. And so in doing this project, we worked to look at, to break down kind of the monolithic historical memory of Bunker Hill, which often tends to veer towards a very military heavy, revolution heavy view of that history without considering the ways that the use of the Bunker Hill Monument has evolved over time. And in doing this research, I found somewhere close to probably 50 quotes from different time periods and people, and talking about different perspectives on what the Bunker Hill Monument has meant over time. And narrowing those down and finding kind of a usable group of quotes, they sorted themselves into 4 different sections. The living memory of the Battle of Bunker Hill, which spans from 1775 to 1825, and looks at how eyewitnesses and other people who were affected by the battle thought about the Battle of Bunker Hill, and also the ways that the community started to build historical memory in the years before the Bunker Hill Monument existed. And then we have the construction of the monument from 1825 to 1843, looking at both what the Bunker Hill Monument Association, who fundraised and championed the construction of the monument, thought about the story they were trying to tell, but also how community members reacted to the construction. And then looking at the first 50 years of the monument after it was finished from 1825 to 1843, I looked at the changing memories and the ways that that history has been reinterpreted or was reinterpreted. And then from 1893 until today, looking at the ongoing legacies and how people have continued to think about the memory of the Bunker Hill Monument. And so today I'm going to go through each of those categories and talk about one story from each section. But we do have a web feature where you can explore a lot more of those voices, and we'll drop the link to that later on. So the first category and the first story I want to talk about is the living memory of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And this category, as I said, is really looking at eyewitnesses to the battle, but also trying to expand our narrative of what it means to think about the Battle of Bunker Hill and the experiences of people that were affected by it. And the story that resonates, at least for me, the most about this section is Faith Trumbull Huntington. And I want to say also, both Faith Trumbull Huntington and all 4 of the examples I'm showing today, I really only have time to give a snippet of each of their stories, but we have articles that correspond with all of them, so you can learn more. So Faith Trumbull Huntington was a patriot woman, and she was married to Jedediah Huntington, Jed, and he served in the Connecticut militia. And after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, he came to Boston to support the siege of Boston, leaving Faith alone in Connecticut. And much like many other women who had family members who went off to fight in the war, Faith was, affected by the absence of her husband, and by a cruel twist of fate, she ends up visiting Roxbury on June 17th, 1775. And she witnesses the Battle of Bunker Hill from afar in the camp at Roxbury. And although she was witnessing this from miles away across the city, she would have heard the cannons and seen the smoke and felt the very real fear and anticipation of what might happen. And that really affected her. She went back to Connecticut, and she fell into a depression because of what she witnessed. And despite the best efforts of her family and friends to care for her and get her medical attention for her mental health, although it wasn't, necessarily understood in the same way that we understand depression today, she was treated as if it was an illness. She was brought to Massachusetts so that she could be closer to her husband so that he could visit. But none of this changed what she had seen, and the fact that she understood that she was now facing this reality of war that her husband and 3 of her 4 brothers were fighting in. And she committed suicide on November 24th, 1775. Her brother John Trumbull, the famous Revolutionary era painter, reflected later on her experience, saying about her experience witnessing Battle of Bunker Hill, quote, "About noon of that day, I had a momentary interview with my favorite sister, the wife of Colonel, afterwards General Huntington, whose regiment was on its march to join the army. The novelty of military scenes excited great curiosity throughout the country, and my sister was one of a party of young friends who were attracted to visit the army before Boston. She was a woman of deep and affectionate sensibility, and the moment of her visit was most unfortunate. She found herself surrounded not by the pomp and circumstance of glorious war, but in the midst of all its horrible realities. She saw too clearly the life of danger and hardship upon which her husband and her favorite brother had entered, and it overcame her strong but too sensitive mind. She became deranged and died the following November at Dedham." And Faith's story really resonates with me for several reasons. First of all, it's so different from most of the accounts that most people are used to when thinking about eyewitnesses to the American Revolution. And it really, I mean, this quote says it all, I think, sheds light on the fact that this was a war, and it was violent and deadly and tore families apart. And the experience of people like Faith Trumbull Huntington represents the experience of many women, right? We know about her story because she was a wealthy, powerful woman who had family that had letters preserved, but she was not the only woman who was left alone to raise a family or tend to the house while her husband and family went off to war. And she was not the only woman that was facing that reality that her loved ones might not make it. And she was not the only woman who committed suicide because of it. But when we think about casualties in the American Revolution and the experiences of people who witnessed the battle, we tend to think about those who fought in it, even though most of the people who were affected by the Battle of Bunker Hill did not fight. And Faith herself was really martyred by her community. Her obituary drew a direct connection between what she had witnessed at the Battle of Bunker Hill and her suicide, saying that the authors of American oppression and the public calamity are accountable for her death and that of thousands more. And yet, this idea of the effects of war reaching beyond the battlefield is not something that is typically associated with that history. So Faith's story gives one example of an eyewitness and that creation of memory soon after the war, right? You have this obituary where people are already drawing connections between her death and what she witnessed and how that affected her. And that memory continues to evolve, moving on until kind of the next section we arrive at, the construction of the Bunker Hill Monument. So in 1825, the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument is laid on the 50th anniversary of the battle. And it takes 18 years to complete construction of the Bunker Hill Monument. And so it's dedicated in 1843. And oftentimes when we think about the construction and kind of the narrative behind what this monument meant to people, we consider the voices of members of the Bunker Hill Monument Association. We might think about people like Sarah Josepha Hale, who fundraised for the monument, and other women who helped reach the milestone of the money needed to complete it. But not everyone agreed with the construction of the monument. And even within the people who were working towards the completion of this monument, many people had competing ideas about what it meant. There's no one meaning of the Bunker Hill Monument, even as it's being constructed. So looking in this section, I tried to look at many different perspectives. There was a lot of really interesting voices of veterans who themselves disagreed with the very idea of a monument to the Battle of Bunker Hill. And the story that I'm going to talk about for the purposes of this presentation is that of Seth Luther. And Seth Luther is a really interesting guy. He was a labor activist, and he worked in the early, in the 1830s in the early labor movement. And his main goal was really working towards the 10-hour day. So he was involved in a series of strikes that happened in Boston, one in 1832 and one in 1834. And he toured New England, speaking to various factory workers and tradespeople, and trying to inspire involvement in the labor movement. In 1834, he published a circular letter that was sent around to the states in New England and eventually made its way down to Philadelphia. And this inspired the 1834 strike in Boston, which failed, but it also inspired the 1835 strike in Philadelphia, which ended up being successful and led to the implementation of a 10-hour workday in many places in Philadelphia. And then Seth Luther also was very involved in the movement towards universal suffrage, or excuse me, not universal, but free suffrage in Rhode Island, where there were a lot of property laws that provided or that placed barriers on who could vote. And so he was very active in trying to break down those barriers and allow more people to have their voice heard in Rhode Island, which led to his involvement in the Dorr Rebellion, which is a very interesting piece of history that is a whole other presentation on its own, but led to the election of 2 different governors for a period in Rhode Island. And he was arrested for his involvement in this rebellion. And after his arrest, he kind of went downhill a bit. He's eventually arrested for trying to rob a bank in order to raise money to help the Mexican War. And he spends the end of his life in various asylums across New England. But his work as a labor activist really lays the groundwork for a lot of the later labor organizations that happens in New England. And in his pamphlets and address to the working men of New England, he writes about the Bunker Hill Monument, that the unfinished monument is a most excellent emblem of our unfinished independence. There let it stand unfinished until the time passes away when aristocrats talk about mercy to mechanics and laborers. There let it stand unfinished until our rights are acknowledged, and we as working men will carry it to its destined height without screwing a $5 bill out of the hard earnings of the poor man, or appealing to our fair countrywomen to replace money which we believe has been expended extravagantly, leaving, after all, that structure a monument of disgrace to this age and this nation, and a deeper, blacker disgrace to some of its managers who, while they are calling on us for money to raise a monument to national glory, are using their influence to prevent us from improving our condition in any way whatever. So Seth Luther is really interesting to me for many reasons, but this quote in particular I think is really powerful. Seth Luther was the son of a veteran of the American Revolution, so his kind of claim to this memory of the revolution and this idea of the unfinished independence has that kind of personal tie for him. And it's also interesting to me because this quote feels very relevant, I think, to today and the ways that we are often thinking about the ideas of an unfinished revolution and what it means to continually interrogate what the revolution means to us. And his imagery about the monuments, like actual construction, is also, I think, really striking. Right, he directly calls out kind of the idea that he doesn't buy into this narrative and uses the fact that it's physically unfinished as this really, really powerful metaphor. And yet This is not a perspective that is typically seen within discussions of what the monuments meant to community members and the validity of the perspective that is represented in its construction. And that kind of tension between community members who sometimes were in favor of the monument and sometimes were not, really, I think is representative of a larger kind of tension about what it means to commemorate the Battle of Bunker Hill and the American Revolution more broadly. And that those ideas carry into the next kind of section here, the changing memories, which looks at from 1843 to 1893. And this is a very tumultuous period in American history. You know, over the course of this 50 years, the first 50 years of the monument's completion, we have the US Civil War. There are women, you know, fighting for their rights, including suffrage. There's a huge influx in immigration. And at the same time, the revolutionary generation is dying out. So you no longer have this living memory of people who witnessed or lived through and were affected by the American Revolution and the Battle of Bunker Hill. So you have kind of the gap here where new interest groups are kind of vying for their place in the story of the Battle of Bunker Hill and trying to assert their kind of claims to that history. And at the moment of the centennial of the American Revolution, especially, there's this massive contest over what it means to commemorate this history. And a really poignant example of this is the experience of Irish immigrants in Boston as it relates to the Battle of Bunker Hill and the Bunker Hill Monument, I should say. So in the 1850s, you have a massive influx of Irish immigration to Boston, largely because of the potato famine. And you have immigration all across the United States, but in Boston in particular, it's the Irish population that really sticks. And these Irish immigrants are often met with very anti-immigrant sentiment from Boston's white Protestant elites, who, as it so happens, tend to be the people controlling kind of the narratives about the revolution and in the places of power to assert their claims. And this kind of comes to a head at the commemoration of the Battle of Bunker Hill. But it starts at the Battle of Lexington, or the commemoration of the Battle of Lexington and Concord. So in 1875, at that commemoration, George William Curtis, who was a politician who held a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, gave a speech at the commemoration. And in that speech, he really asserts some anti-immigrant views, suggesting that foreign immigrants don't have a claim to the revolution unless they have direct lineage, which was kind of a common claim among a lot of these people trying to assert their own dominance in this story. And the Irish community in Boston really takes this as a challenge, and they particularly kind of decide that the commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill is going to be their moment to really come in and assert their claims to the revolution and find ways that they can connect to this history. So the Pilot, which was the Irish Catholic newspaper in Charlestown, runs kind of a campaign where they're publishing articles about like the history of the Battle of Bunker Hill, and they're publishing poetry and op-eds about why this history matters. And they really they put out a call to get members of the Irish community to try to get them involved in this commemoration. And in that kind of all call, they write that we hope to see the Irish society as well presented in the procession being the commemoration of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Not that we doubt their devotion to republicanism, but that their presence may be a formal reproof to George William Curtis and his know-nothing supporters. It is to be deplored that at a time like this, such better feelings should be stirred, But now that a public orator has declared that foreign-born men have no association with the men of the Revolution, it is our duty to show that in love of freedom and loyalty to the Republic, the citizens of foreign birth take no second place, while in veneration for bravery, they are not bound by race or nationality. So the Irish community really harnesses this commemoration in order to stake a claim. And this is indicative of a much larger kind of move. As I mentioned earlier, you have many different interest groups who are kind of trying to gain validity in their own movements by referring to the American Revolution and the Battle of Bunker Hill to kind of give themselves something to rally around. So along with the Irish population, you have a lot of abolitionists in Boston who are clinging on to the revolution and the ideals that go along with it as like a rallying point, and referencing the principles of the revolution, and drawing comparisons between the fight for abolition. You have people like Lucy Stone, who are using memory of the revolution to further women's rights movements. And the Irish societies among these are working to stake that claim. And in particular, this is interesting because Charlestown still has a massive Irish population. These strong Irish ties still continue to exist today. There's a good quote that Charlestown is the only place where Irish Catholics celebrate a British military victory. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but this history continues to have ties to today, and this claim that was staked at the centennial continues to have echoes today. And I also think that this is really interesting and important to consider because as we're approaching the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, we continue to grapple with a lot of these questions, right? Like, who has the opportunity to see themselves represented in history? A lot of the claims as to why immigrants didn't have a kind of claim to this history is because their lineage wasn't represented in the war, which again, those are questions I think we still have today about how we can expand what it means to connect to history beyond having kind of those direct ties that we typically like to value. And then also these questions of who has a stake in history and who is it important to, and how can we move forward and use history as a way to continue, you know, the fight of whatever you're working towards. And those kind of questions raised in this time period as people grappled with what it means to commemorate the war after there are no longer people to celebrate have continued to go on today. And we continue to try to figure out how to use this space and think about our relationships with history, and think about how the monuments can continue to encourage that work. So in this ongoing legacies kind of section of this project, we really looked at the long arc of the ways we've remembered the Battle of Bunker Hill and used the Bunker Hill Monument, looking at not only how people have thought about the past, but also how people have used the Bunker Hill Monument as like a public gathering space, and added their own meanings on top of those of the Revolution. So the example that I'm going to be talking about is the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, but we also have looked at art projects. We looked at the use of the history of the Battle of Bunker Hill and the imagery of Bunker Hill Monument in World War II and how that was used to inspire. And in this section, I think is really intended to encourage people to continue to think about their relationship with Bunker Hill Monument. So the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, in 1971, a protest called Operation POW, Operation Prisoner of War, took place in Boston over the course of 3 days. And over that time, more than 200 Vietnam veterans camped at Lexington and Concord, and then Bunker Hill, and then went to the Boston Common. And this was supposed to be a reverse version of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. The idea being that Paul Revere warned of the British coming, and this protest was intended to warn the Greater Boston and the American populace of America's role in the Vietnam War. And this protest started off rocky in Lexington and Concord with a mass arrest that was the largest mass arrest in Massachusetts history. And then they continued on, and the second night they camped at the Bunker Hill Monument. And after the first night, these protesters were not sure how they were going to be received, but they were met with a lot of support from the Charlestown community. Many community members had family members who were serving in the Vietnam War, and who had strong feelings about what these protesters were fighting for. And kind of in response to the protest, some of the organizers wrote about their experience, that we find upon reflection that our duty to our country has not ended, and that like the winter soldiers Tom Paine wrote of, who stayed behind at Valley Forge in 1776, when the summer soldiers and the sunshine patriots returned to their homes, we must join the harshest campaign of the entire war, the movement to bring about an immediate cessation of all hostilities in Indochina and an immediate withdrawal of all troops. We, as Vietnam veterans, strongly feel that the United States should cease to build memorials to death and begin to glorify life. So this quote is really compelling to me because of this idea of a war monument as a place of a protest against war. And I think it's a really poignant example of this kind of question of what does it mean to commemorate war and to build war monuments? And this is a question that arose kind of across all the periods in my research. I found some really interesting quotes during the period of the construction of the monument from community members who were veterans of the American Revolution, who themselves were saying that building a monument to the Battle of Bunker Hill is not an adequate way to commemorate and thank the soldiers that served in the American Revolution, and that, in fact, a better way of going about would be to provide resources for those veterans, or to invest in peace. So this idea of what it is that a war monument kind of means to people has many through lines throughout history. But again, the perception that people tend to have when coming to a place like the Battle of Bunker Hill, like Bunker Hill Monument, is that this is about the battle and it's celebrating the veterans and celebrating the role of the battle in the revolution, and that we should appreciate it for what it is without kind of questioning any of the ideas behind that and the memory of the monument. And so, the imagery of these Vietnam veterans marching and staying at Bunker Hill Monument, I think, is a really good example of a way that people continue to, investigate these ideas. So I hope that these stories have inspired you to expand the ways you think about the Bunker Hill Monument. I hope, as you've seen, there are many different ways that people have interacted with this space and this memory over time. And although the kind of traditional narratives associated with the Bunker Hill Monument are important, there are also many other experiences of many other people that are also worthy of consideration. And you are a part of this memory. The monument belongs as much to you as it did to the members of the Bunker Hill Monument Association who championed the monument's construction. And I hope you take that with you and continue to kind of use this baseline to challenge your own kind of ideas about what it is to memorialize a space and what this monument means to you. And if any of this has resonated with you and you'd like to learn more, we do have an online feature where you can explore in more depth the 4 stories I've talked about today, as well as reading the rest of the articles and a variety of other quotes that represent other kind of perspectives. And we also will have an in-person interactive being prototyped this summer at the Bunker Hill Museum that will allow you to investigate these quotes and build a physical monument that represents or that displays what the monument kind of represents to you and looks at those different quotes and what you think of them. So very excited about those kind of 2 continuations of this, and I will turn it over to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ainsley, for that presentation. So do you have a couple questions in the chat? Did want to share, so I will run through them. So did have just a kind of a basic question, wondering if you could answer where did the granite from the monument come from?
So the granite was sourced in Quincy. And there's actually, there's a whole history there as well. They had to build a railroad to get it, and it was massive undertaking. And so there's a lot of with kind of the stalling of the construction of the monument. There's a whole kind of whole other presentation there, but Quincy was where the quarry was.
Great. So wondering if there is a story related to the monument that you're curious to dig into more?
Ooh, there's a lot. As I said, I think I researched about like 50 different quotes relating to this history. And 16 of them have at this point made it to the kind of more built out presentation with articles associated with them. Let's see, I would like to, I think, look at the experiences and perspectives of people who actually physically built the monument. And that was something I wasn't really able to find in my research at this point. But when we think about whose ideas are represented in kind of the memory of the Bunker Hill Monument, we don't often think, again, all of these perspectives are things we don't often think about, but the actual labor that went into the construction of the monument and the perspectives of the people who physically built it are not something I've been able to come across. So I'd love to do some more research and try to find some of those perspectives and kind of what did the monument mean to the people who actually physically built it.
Great. So had a question coming in about where and how you found all the quotes about the monument. So I guess just kind of like speaking a little bit to your research process and kind of how you pulled all this together.
Yeah, it was a whole host of things. I did a lot of researching in newspapers at least for like initial kind of mentions. I often, what I would do as kind of a starting point would be just like to search the words Bunker Hill Monument on a resource like newspapers.com, and look at a specific kind of year or two, to find out what some of the mentions were. And there's a lot of, I mean, I found so many very random mentions that will lead nowhere, but like Shirley Temple visited the Bunker Hill Monument at one point. The more you know. And then if anything intriguing popped up, I would use the dates of whatever that mention was, to look deeper and kind of with whatever the context happened to be, look at the deeper story there, and find other newspapers or like letters regarding the stories, you know, broadsides and posters, things like that, all sorts of things. But online digital archives of newspapers was for me really helpful.
Awesome. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. If anyone did come in late, this will be, it has been recorded and it will be on YouTube. So you're more than welcome to check it out there. But without any additional questions, I'm again, thank you very much, Ainsley. And Eric, I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add. All right. So with that, I think we can turn it back over to Karen to close us out.
All right. I think I'm on the screen. Ah, yes. My computer has been real fun today. So it's going to be a real quick closeout. Honestly, all-time favorite series program. Honestly, Ranger Annalise, Ranger Eric, we did amazing, and I really, really loved it. I truly appreciate the entire National Parks team for creating all of these presentations. You've been doing amazing work, and you continue to do amazing work. And we look forward to our continued partnership, more programs, and come back here to next year. Until then, see you all. Thank you so much.